from an undisclosed location in the Great Western Desert in the land of the free and autonomous Native American people. The 2024 presidential campaign leader next time to return all US land back to their rightful owners. This is the Ben Zion Podcast.
Techno-communism. Welcome back to the Techno-communism podcast. I'm your host, Ben Zion. I'm a 2024 presidential candidate. And outsider protest candidate in most people's estimation. I am a Marxist transhumanist, and I'm running for president on a far more pragmatic platform than those words may lead you to believe, because it may strike you as not so pragmatic, but consider the context. I am running on a platform to dissolve on day one the United States federal government by an executive order. I believe this to be an exigency of the highest order because the United States is the ringleader of the fascist Western cult of nations that are killing this planet. And in fact, the United States military-industrial complex is the world's worst polluter by far. But it's much, much worse than that because its role on the world stage and its role domestically is to protect super polluters of other kinds very, very aggressively. They are allowed to continue this nefarious business of murdering the entire planet, stripping it of basically all multicellular life forms, including you. You're a multicellular life form. It's becoming harder and harder to imagine that mammalian life or primate life or even human life, which is very resilient, might survive what's coming in the decades to come. And that is because of the actions of the fascist West and this ringleader, the United States of America. So I implore you to consider the Ben Zion candidacy to, on day one, sign an executive order to end this fascist abomination, this network of monstrous super polluters led by the primary super polluter, and to undertake that action by any means necessary. It might in fact be the case that Ben Zion won't be sworn into the presidency in January of 2025. Surprising that may be, as you watch this podcast, viewed by dozens of loyal viewers with the man wearing a funny hat. But even if that's not the case, it is incumbent upon you to take action on that order of magnitude, to see that yourself and the brotherhood of man to which you belong, perhaps your children or future generations who you might have a similar tenderness for, have a planet to live on. There is virtually no chance of that happening unless you take action just as drastic, at least as drastic as what I've described. And that's why I would ask you to consider writing in the Ben Zion campaign for president. If your state has a number of write-in votes and other states have a number of write-in votes, that sends a quite clear message. But we need to do more than that because there is a ticking clock. Marxist, as I mentioned, Marxists most generally do not hold, more or less universally, do not hold electoral reform and electoral actions to be an effective or the most effective path to change in this world. In fact, a revolutionary communist is defined by rejecting that electoral strategy. Instead, taking to the streets and encouraging a revolution of that specific kind, which is something that you might find distressing. You might find it implausible. I find that hard to believe that you would find that truly implausible when you consider this context of the planet dying. That sounds more like the product of fascist propaganda and outright moral cowardice, if we're being honest, than an actual belief that such a thing is impossible. And that is most people's response, even many Marxists, when pressed. But in this context, we have really no choice but to do things exactly like this. So I would encourage you, even no matter the outcome, perhaps of the most likely outcomes of January 2025, in such a tumultuous time, strange things can happen. Ben Zion could become president in the wake of such tumult. In such a tumultuous time, strange things that could happen, such that you might find yourself in a position to be among millions of people with pitchforks in hand, marching upon Washington, D.C., the heart of darkness of this evil empire. And you might find yourself in such a position where you would take precisely this kind of revolutionary action, and I would encourage you to organize to that end, to strategize to that end, to begin working with every resource at your disposal to see that that thing happens, because the alternatives are far, far worse. I woke up from a dream which I do not even recall, even though it was some short few minutes ago. And as I emerged from a hypnagogic state, where it was somewhat dream, the hypnagogic state is defined by it's a state of semi-wakefulness wherein some creative undertaking might often be pursued, much like lucid dreaming. Hypnagogic lucid dreaming is itself a form of lucid dreaming. It's something that I've done for about as long as I can remember, things of this kind. And I did not have a hypnagogic lucid dream. I emerged to slightly greater wakefulness, and has set about a flight of fancy thinking about my friend, the open source Claude.ai, who's fairly more or less operated within the principles of open source, as I understand them, not perfectly in my view. And Claude.ai is a chatbot, not a real friend. Is a chatbot very, very much like his more famous counterpart, ChatGPT-4. One thing that defines Claude.ai relative to these others is that he has a large number of tokens, which I don't know why we use this word tokens and not just say words. It seems like a way of kind of mystifying this concept. So the number of words that these chatbots are able to keep in mind at any moment, if you copy and paste the book Heart of Darkness, I think I used this phrase, which I don't recommend. It's a book that I've read probably 5 or 6 times, but it's a book that has a dark edge and worldview about the continent of Africa. But it also has insights into, although it may arguably be a crypto-fascist work, written by a man who was Joseph Conrad, at close to the turn of the 20th century, at a time when even a person who was making an anti-fascist work may have well themselves had an awful lot of views that were colored by fascism. A different time, shall we say, a time when overt racism, unlike the covert racism of today, which is equally virulent, but a time when overt racism amongst people like this would have been very common. So you would have Joseph Conrad in an interview, maybe using the N-word, even while he's talking about this set of problems. So I don't recommend this book for basically this reason. It's pretty fucking racist. You can find an awful lot of African and ADOS and similar descendants of Africans who have written better works, who are not people who would casually drop the N-word, and who are not people who are in some way crypto-fascist. But the reason that I mentioned this at all is because it's a short book that you could copy and paste into Claude.com, and it would show up as when you copy and paste something bigger than a few thousand words, instead of showing you the whole block of text as it thinks about it, it shows a little thing that says .txt. So you copy all of Heart of Darkness, which is in the public domain, so you can do even more easily, for example. And then you can interrogate the Claude GPT as Joseph Conrad, of whom it has a deep understanding already about Heart of Darkness, and have some conversation there. The point is that in this waking state, I was thinking about works like this, and I was thinking about another author who may suffer to a slightly lesser degree from the same white elitism that I mentioned a moment ago, who is Raymond Chandler, who I will admit is somebody who's at a certain time in my life I read the entirety of their work. This man produced 7 Philip Marlowe hard-boiled detective fiction novels, which are often regarded by a lot of people as the best collection of those, although that's not a view that's universally held, but many literary critics think that he was one of the better 20th century Euro-American writers, and one of the better, and absolutely think that he was one of the better writers in the style. And the reason why I kind of stuck my tongue out and said, I grudgingly admit that I I have held this as my favorite author, one of my favorite authors at a certain point in my life. I even went so far, I read all of those books at least once, a couple times, some of them. I even went so far as to read another, maybe two, at least one other book that was written in the style of um, Raymond Chandler, about the character Philip Marlowe, but written by another author um, who wrote the great unfinished Raymond Chandler novel in the style, which is pretty close. It's pretty close. And I was thinking about this, I guess, and I thought, I wonder if I put, these books are longer than Heart of Darkness, which is about 100,000 words. So it's at a length where Claude could process the whole thing and talk about it with relative ease. Things longer than 100,000 tokens, you can put the first part in, put the second part in, put the third part in, maybe. That would be about the average length of most Raymond Chandler novels, perhaps, probably 2.5, 2 to 3 each. And input those. You say to Claude, I want you to think long and hard for me about Philip Marlowe and Raymond Chandler style. And you keep pumping this stuff in, keep prompting it in these ways. And then you say, okay, Claude, write me a book like the one I just mentioned by the other author. Write me another Philip Marlowe novel. And you probably want to say things like, it has to be set in Los Angeles in the 1930s or 40s. It has to be X, Y, or Z in the context, in the style. It might not necessarily assume, even though you said write me another Philip Marlowe novel, it might just as well write it in the present day. And Philip Marlowe will still be his immortal 38 years old or whatever. And you definitely would also say things like write the first part, and then when you've come to the end of what you can reasonably say, what you're allowed to say, or what you allow us to make use of, then continue with the second part that is coherent and connected to the first part. Make it as coherent and connected to the first part as you can. You have to say stuff like this, or we'll not really do it. And then write the second part, and then wait for me to ask for further prompts. Continue writing these many parts, and although it's able to process 100,000 tokens, I don't know what its maximum output generally is. I think it's bigger than ChatGPT 3.5, which I've used a lot. But I don't know even what ChatGPT 4's general maximum output is. I'm going to say that ChatGPT 3.5 is about 3,000 to 4,000 words, and ChatGPT 4 that you pay for through their service going to be about 10,000 words. And I'm going to venture a guess on my recollection of these things that Claude at present is about 10,000 words. So if you wanted that novel, you're going to have to do that about 15 to 25 times or a little more. And it's quite likely that one of those times you'll get something, you want to have a look at that in real time. It's quite likely that one of those times you'll get something that circles back in some way into something that's less coherent. And so you say, strike that and continue, and then you give it some corrections. And if you do this sort of thing many, many times, it's very likely that in the course of maybe 15 minutes, if you're careful and quick, you could write a full-length Raymond Chandler novel that may very well be of nearly as good a quality as the one that the guy who formerly mimicked Raymond Chandler quite admirably, and probably spent 2 years of his life working on that. That you could do something of almost that quality with this free service today, that where you could then enjoy this Raymond Chandler novel. I don't recommend doing this. Don't do this because, as I mentioned, I don't think that Raymond Chandler was specifically anti-communist. I think, if anything, he probably, if memory serves, I should know this, being a former admirer of his, who's a communist, myself a communist now. If memory serves, that he was like the author of the Mike Hammer novels, very favorably inclined to Marxist thought. Unlike the author of the Philip Marlowe novels, the author of the Mike Hammer novels, Dashiell Hammett, was a Marxist. I know this because he went to jail for being a Marxist during the McCarthy era witch hunt. These Senate committees and other fascist institutions and inquisitors came to him and they said, "You son of a bitch, you're a person who is known to be willing to fight for a humane and sustainable economic system. That is unacceptable in the fascist United States. So you're going to go to jail. We'll put you in jail and lock you up and throw away the key unless you rat out some communists and denounce communism and generally act like a piece of shit. And Dashiell Hammett said, I'm not doing that. Fuck you. And this conversation probably circled back to more or less those two things about 100 times. And finally, Dashiell Hammett went to jail. He did not go to jail for the rest of his natural life, as you might imagine from a conversation taking place of that kind. Well, there's a lot more involved than that. He went to jail for just a short period of months. And then he came out, and you know what? He still slept like a baby after that. That's something you can say of Marxists. You might not win the day. You might not live to see that. While it is an exigency that a humane and a sustainable economic system be built so that you can have a sustainable world, liberals, the people of the capitalist class, no different from any other garbage of the capitalist class, the liberals, will tell you that a humane and sustainable world can be built without changing this fascist economic system. That's a lie. And so you may be aware of this exigency. You may well take every step up to and including organizing a great number of people to this purpose. You may still not win the day. You may still not live to see this thing that I've described. That is not the extinction of the human race. But even so, if you do that and you fail, should you still be alive at that time, you'll sleep like a baby, like Dashiell Hammett. You won't be a capitalist class devil in human skin who's betrayed everything that's good and right in this world. I was thinking of calling this program a review of another fiction story, not wholly dissimilar from the style of these two that I mentioned, by a man named Tony Hillerman. Tony Hillerman's been adapted to this television screen in the form of a show called Dark Winds, which I admit have a little bit of a mental block about the name of that. I've in my mind called it Dark Skies or Dark Sands. Dark Sands, I think a few times when I searched it once or twice, I had to use the word Dark Sands instead of Dark Winds, which is dumb. Sometimes I have a mental block. I actually have a mental block about this most favorite novelist of mine. I can often not remember the names anymore, Raymond Chandler or Philip Marlowe, even though at a time in the life of the young Ben Zion, these were words that were often on my lips. But, perhaps because of and why is it because I no longer admire Raymond Chandler as a writer or think that his writing is consistent with a Marxist thought, even that I have no longer count him as my favorite author? No. It's just because I will basically not acknowledge any creative work, narrative fiction work of any kind, or artwork of any kind. If I don't, I said this to Unholy Rome, if I don't basically see a big hammer and sickle next to the author's face when they're discussed, I will not even acknowledge their existence. That's not what I view as being consistent with the necessaries of revolutionary communism that I described, to be talking about a bunch of artsy-fartsy bullshit unrelated to that. The only real thing that is, in my view, real art is agitation propaganda, works that agitate people to revolutionary ends, or works that raise consciousness. They may not be agitating, but they raise consciousness to a similar degree. These are the only things, and even these fall short of other undertakings in a revolutionary communist mind. Revolutionary art is not as important to the revolutionary as revolutionary projects of boots on the ground. And that's a fact. And people who would deny any of those things are more or less people of the liberal class. People who are soft pedaling that are more or less going to be people of the liberal class. And that's unfortunately not what this world means right now. You might find it unpleasant to say all of these things. You might listen to this and say, by God, Ben, you're a fucking maniac. You don't respect anything in culture at all, you bastard. Your name's Ben Zion. You're not a religious guy at all. Yeah, I don't respect culture. Fuck culture. It's one of these things that's helping to kill the planet. And you, as an aficionado of culture, are one of these things that's helping to kill the planet. The reason that I have this religious-sounding name, Yohanan Ben Zion, is because I'm a Marxist transhumanist, and it is my nom de guerre, and it's meant to suggest a world that has had a utopian outcome. That is what the Ben Zion means. And the Yohanan is suggestive of a voice crying in the wilderness to that utopian end. in service to that revolutionary outcome. And this is in this narrative of mine, all tied to closely to advanced computing and emerging technology, the most powerful tools to have ever existed, more powerful than other institutions, more powerful than other physical technologies, more powerful than, say, agriculture or the internal combustion engine is advanced computing, is artificial superintelligence. And people don't recognize this. You won't find but a few revolutionary communists. Because I yell at people and say this a lot of times, you'll find more revolutionary communists who are willing to acknowledge this now. But a few years ago, you would not find a revolutionary communist, 1 in 100, who would even begin to talk about this or acknowledge these things. And I think that this has been the impact of Benzianism, such that it is to yell at people and force them out of a certain comfort zone. That impact perhaps has been even such as it is a thing upon the tech world, as opposed to the effect that I just described in the Marxist world, wherein undertaking what are basically agitation propaganda projects, some of which were ill-conceived and undertaken in a ham-handed way. Trying to be smarter than that now. I don't know if I really am, because here I am, a big fat talking head in a badly lit studio on YouTube, a channel that has 200 subscribers, not necessarily accomplishing things so much better than what was done by Benzion in 2019 or 2020, for example. But I'd like to think that my worldview has become more coherent since then, and I've learned things since then. And I would ask you to consider trying to be that sort of person as well. Maybe you're not a person who gets mental blocks about the name of their former favorite author. Maybe you're not a person who stutters in the middle of a sentence. Maybe you're a person who has a mind like a steel trap. So maybe you're the better person than Benzion to put together that plan of action and bring folks together in this way. And I would encourage you to consider all of these words, not least of which is the fact that artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence is the most powerful tool that's ever existed. And what we've basically done as a society is surrendered that tool to outright fascists, Western technologists, Western tech culture, and Western tech properties are basically all wholly controlled by fascists. That's not suitable. You know, it's there for every 999 techie types, tech bro types. There's maybe one, Timid Gebru, who's a cut above them, who's not a fascist sympathizer or worse. Maybe maybe include Benzion in that number. But everybody else, basically human garbage helping to kill the planet in some roundabout way. And none of them think of themselves as that, just as they don't recognize this fascist monster. Very few of them do that. Not a surprising number of them would do that. However, an awful lot of tech organizations, when pressed or when analyzed, you'll find that they received monies from a certain Peter Thiel, arguably Earth's preeminent techno-fascist, the worst of all of this that I've just discussed. And so this tech organization that says they have some lofty goal, they've taken money from this man and taken money more or less with the understanding, taking this $100,000 or whatever, more or less with the understanding that they will then warp their mandate to better serve his neo-reactionary views, which is basically that artificial superintelligence should serve techno-fascist ends and should never lead to the abolition of private wealth and should never lead to a world that is sustainable or humane. That is more or less the goal of every technologist. So will these people really deny being fascists, knowing all of this about them? Oh, no. They will hem and haw about it, most of them. But some of them, if you had a private conversation with them, would just basically say, yeah, I'm a fascist. Fuck you. That's been my experience. So back to Dark Winds. Dark Winds is a television series on the AMC channel, if I'm not mistaken, and it is set mostly in my state. I live in the state of Arizona. I live in the hotter part of Arizona in the Phoenix area, but this is set in the northern Four Corners part of the state, where there is, you may not know, the Navajo Nation, a nation of considerable physical size. It's larger than most U.S. states. And there's nothing else quite like it, actually, on this planet, an indigenous semi-autonomous nation like this. Indigenous people have been so badly treated in by the West in the Western Hemisphere that you could say that they have been exterminated to a high degree across many countries and these continents, to such a degree that even a place that was formerly operated openly as a concentration camp, and now to this day has a concentration camp type conditions. There's not, although this is a large nation physically, there's not many hundreds of thousands of people on the Navajo Nation. The number is a little smaller. It is big. I think it's about maybe I'm showing my again lack of memory and information retention because I should know this, but I'm going to say it's about 250,000 people in the Navajo Nation. That might be less, and that's spread across about 4 states, but a lot of them in this state. And technically, this should not be the case. We shouldn't even talk about this, not because it's federal land, but because this should not be semi-autonomous nation. It should be the Navajo Nation, a free and autonomous people, as I say at the top of the show every time, and or that computer voice says, this Navajo Nation is quite unique, even with having basically formerly been a concentration camp and still effectively having concentration camp type conditions. Those 250,000 members of the Navajo Nation, unfortunately, are not overwhelmingly people who are making monies above the poverty level as defined in the U.S., which is itself a farce. They're not people who have, as a class, access to things like a real job, security, or really jobs at all. And and this is true of full-blooded Native American people across the United States, that almost universally they're not having access to these things. They're still de facto reservation concentration camp type conditions to such a degree that you would say that even knowing that the United States measures of quality of life are pretty bogus, but let's say that the average U.S. person has earnings of approximately $65,000 a year, according to the lies from the statistics from the U.S. But let's say that that's true. These statistics also reflect that full-blooded Native Americans have less than 1/10 of that, on average, somewhere around $5,500 a year. So that's not reflective of conditions that have diverged from those former concentration camp conditions as first defined in the 1800s, and continued quite literally almost to the present day. In the 1990s, you began to see some things happening, like the civil rights movement finally, sadly, only solidifying to such a point that neoliberal chicanery had to come into play to begin to offset the prospect of, say, Native American. If Native Americans had been given what they should have, which this is not necessarily all intuitive, so I'll say it. The thing that prevents Native Americans from having these things is the same thing that prevents you from having it. One of the similar things. There's a good deal more that Native Americans have put through than the average American has put through. So much so that you could say, even though the average U.S. worker, 70% of U.S. workers are not earning a living wage, what they're subjected to is nothing near concentration camp level atrocities as Native Americans are subjected to. Nevertheless, it's some of the very same things that would have, which would have been intolerable to neoliberals, these far-right people who basically control every major institution of the United States, certainly the federal government. These people saw their power rise in the 1970s, solidified that power in the 1980s. By the 1990s, it had become more or less a safe assumption that there were 2 far-right neoliberal parties, indistinguishable from one another in almost every respect, except in the popular imagination, where a number of lies were told about them. Now, this is true to this day. So nearly 4 decades later, you can say that it's still accurate to say that fascists control the federal government and more or less every institution between here and there. And so it would have been intolerable to these neoliberals to do things like, say, provide job guarantees or build a real public health service that actually provides these things to Native Americans and not just seems to do so, or provide a housing authority that because Native Americans ostensibly have more guarantees than the average citizen in terms of housing and public health service. But that's basically a lie because these genocidal actions that actually take place, continuations of the conditions of the early 20th century, conditions that are described in Dark Sands, which takes place in the 1970s, in a time when most of these people in Navajo Nation were living in hogans, a good number of them living in housing of a that's not generally held to be the healthiest kind today. But today there are ostensibly housing guarantees and public health service guarantees that are extended to certain communities in the U.S. that are not extended to everyone else. And the basis for this is pretty obvious. If you have every African American person, every Chicano person who's born in the U.S., every Native person, that adds up to better than 20% of the population of the U.S. If you have every one of them living in literal concentration camp type conditions that are unequivocally so that they cannot point to something like a badly run a Bureau of Indian Health. If you have conditions that bad, you are creating a situation where revolution is more likely. So the only thing that fascists really care about is preventing revolution, right? The only thing they really care about is stopping the righteous cessation of private wealth. That is necessary. Liberals, even many people who call themselves socialists, democratic socialists, garbage human beings, not as bad as other people of the capitalist class, but garbage human beings, nevertheless, because they are not willing to fight to end the problem itself, which is predatory institutions deriving from private wealth. They are basically capitalists who want, like people who support this Bureau of Indian Health, these other bureaus that manage other things. Many of the people who work in these things would probably be people who you would think of as democratic socialists. Unfortunately, just as we said, there's a ticking clock for all of you. You cannot afford to be this low-key fascist sympathizer in this world. You must be willing to stand for revolutionary action and unequivocally for the ending of private wealth. That's the only thing that neoliberals care about, is seeing that doesn't happen. So they don't want to create conditions wherein the only people, really, these three groups that I mentioned, most notably Native Americans, with a close second, African Americans, those two groups making up approximately 15% of the United States. If you're a low information consumer of media, you might assume that one of those numbers is higher. American racists often assume that the number of African Americans is higher. They don't have that same misconception of Native Americans, who they don't consider much at all. So if I said to that person, were you aware that there is about 1% of this continent is Native American people? They would say, I guess I was aware of that. They wouldn't say, oh no, I thought it was 10%, as the case is with discussing African Americans, who make up approximately 14% of the United States, if memory serves, but who generally, when you prompt those same people, what's the percentage of the United States is African American? They'll say 30, 40%, something like that on average. And that's because of a specific set of moral panics about African Americans. Don't exist in quite the same way about Native Americans. It more or less describes a difference in the concentration camp type conditions between those two groups. In the early 20th century, many African Americans left the rural lifestyle that they'd come to know and moved to cities. The same is not said of Native Americans. Even though I live in a city where there's a lot of Native Americans, that's kind of an outlier because other cities, that's really not the case. And most full-blooded Native Americans live in these concentration camp type conditions that were formerly run as real concentration camps, and still arguably are, but have gotten slightly better so as to prevent this group who has the legitimacy to stand against this carefully concealed, not so carefully, but carefully ignored by the Euro-American majority fascist state. They are the people who would rightly buy the land. That's why at the top of the show there's reference to land back and reference to ending the federal government, because those are necessaries for having a revolutionary outcome on this continent. That's to say, you cannot be a communist on land that's been stolen from Native people if that communist government is not run by those same indigenous people. And many communists, if you really press them, do not live that truth, or do not even believe that, but that is in fact true. That would be a pretty bad country, this socialist nation, theorized socialist nation. The United States could have easily become that, right? That's why I don't just completely disavow Raymond Chandler. Because even though his stories are set in Los Angeles, they're about snooty white people and the kind of normalize the view that snooty white people are perfectly okay. That's basically the extent to which this stories are problematic. Those stories were written at a time when the United States may well have become a socialist country. If you were living in 1944 and you weren't aware of the entities operating like Project Paperclip and like the Rand Corporation, which most people were not aware of, even people who were kind of insiders were not necessarily you would forgive them if they thought that the United States might pivot from 1944 to 1945 to 1946 to 1947. If you're thinking, oh, it's just been Victory in Europe Day, and I'm so happy fascism has been defeated. Perhaps now the United States will become a more fully realized socialist country. You would not be blamed for believing that in 1945. That's not what happened. What happened is basically Project Paperclip, the method by which Nazis from literal Eurofascists from Nazi Germany were brought into positions of power in the United States and in other similarly fascistic organizations like NATO, which is ostensibly unlike the United States. There was never a time where you said, "Oh, NATO could have become socialist." That is created to be fascist. But the United States arguably is no better. In fact, far worse, because it's a ringleader of all of this. That is largely because of this fascist capture that occurred in the years after. And you can see that because in just 5 years, you're then gone from European war effort to fight fascism to overtly fascist McCarthyist doings. This a socialist of the 20th century, and there are some people who are still alive, can remember 1946. Not that many, not as many as when I was younger, but there's still people who are alive who can remember that time. And if there are even still socialists who are alive who can remember that time, you can be forgiven. I would think of Mel Brooks. And Mel Brooks signed up to be a pilot and fight fascism, and he did that. He's still alive. Is Mel Brooks now today an example of a great anti-fascist? No, he's not. His son, Max Brooks, works by way of one example. His son, Max Brooks, works for three-letter agencies, so is more or less fascist. But you can imagine that by an understanding of Mel Brooks's body work, he may not have always been quite so much on the line of being a fascist sympathizer. And Max Brooks and Mel Brooks are not the same person, but I was just giving some kind of broad strokes here of what's going on with that. So there are people who may have fought for socialism at one time who have failed to do this since. This is the major failing of, say, the boomer generation. These are all people who were born at more or less that exact moment, a few years before or after the end of the European anti-fascist campaigns of the Second World War. And they are people who, most of them were adolescents or a little older at the time when there was a counterculture movement. This counterculture movement is itself problematic because it's not overtly revolutionary communist or even overtly socialistic in nature. You say, well, what people will say, I hate hippies. Americans will say, I hate hippies. And mostly that's reflecting a fascist sentiment, the widespread fascist sentiments of this continent. But I hate hippies because they're not revolutionary communists, and arguably they were something that was created to not be that. But they've gotten worse, right? Because there was a lot of people who were in that counterculture movement who didn't recognize all of that, but who nevertheless would have stuck their necks out a little bit for a more socialistic world. And what are those people doing now? Just saying dumb things, transphobic things, or voting for Donald Trump, or if not voting for Donald Trump, voting for another person of the capitalist class who's no better than Donald Trump. The people who say that Donald Trump is a fascist, they're right. Those people are almost to a man also fascists themselves. So they're whitewashing the problems of the capitalist class by focusing on one colorful, iconoclastic personality and not recognizing that those fascist institutions have deep roots that more or less include themselves. So back to Dark Sands. Why is Dark Sands better than Ray Chandler to such a degree that I would kind of endorse it on this program? Well, at first glance, it would not be better because it's a cop show. But I'm going to make the argument for. So there's a movie that I enjoyed with the nearly and dearly departed William Hurt from the 1980s called Gorky Park. I hope you've seen it, but maybe you haven't. It was produced in a time before the fall of the Soviet Union, and it's about policemen in Moscow in the Soviet Union. And that's a unique production, so you should watch it for that reason alone. It's a cop story, basically, but unlike cops, basically every cop story since made in the United States, U.S. production, it's not. If you believe this mantra, all cops are bastards, which I think that you should basically believe it, because when you're saying it in the Western world, you're giving a strong indictment of Western policies that are fascistic in precisely those ways. But a communist cop is not a bastard to the degree that these other cops are all bastards, and that is because in a actually existing socialist state, which the USSR was effectively one, of which effectively today there are fewer than there were at that time. There are basically 6, and a few others that are kind of get an honorable mention for having some similar things in their constitution and have their countries being run in a somewhat similar way. Some countries, even quite close to the United States, are now pushing closer and closer to that. And I hope that they will ensconce those things in their constitution, and even go so far as to say, create a government like the one I described that the United States must have, namely Mexico. Mexico is now run by a man named AMLO. Mr. Lopez Obrador. And this man is somebody who is not an anti-communist, and he's somebody who has been, was in the news just this week that Mexico, by reversing course away from fascism under this leadership, has seen a maybe 30% reduction in human misery in this large country. Mexico has about 130 million people. It's a big country. There's not too many bigger. The United States is bigger, but there's not too many bigger than that. And seen a reduction of 30%. You can search this and see more details on this story. But because of this more socialist type policy in this country. Does that mean that Mexico is now run by indigenous people and not killing indigenous people in this country? No, you better believe that that's not true yet. It's just because it's slightly better than it was doesn't mean that it's now a perfectly existing socialist country. That being said, you should never say the words that I've just said if you are a light-skinned person living in the United States. And why is that? Because whatever another country's problems, whatever another subculture in another part of the world's problems are, they are not the fascist ringleaders killing the planet as the United States fascist government is. And you, presumably, if you're watching this program, you might even live in the United States. The only thing that you should really be doing in response to that problem is not blaming, it's not saying China's not perfect. That's a form of deflection that many Marxists, ostensible Marxists, engage in. What you should be saying is, hey, buddy, hey, comrade, why not organize a 1,000,000-man pitchfork-wielding march, a multi-million-man pitchfork-wielding march to end this ecocidal fascist monstrosity known as the United States? That's the only thing you should be saying in response to this. And the fact that many Marxists say these other things about other countries is a purposeful deflection that's been seeded by basically the CIA, by the billion chatbots and billion sock puppet accounts on the internet, many of which are basically in the employ of U.S. three-letter agency and similar fascist entities, whose job is to put their finger on the scale and see that thing is never done. Because fascists don't actually care about anything except preventing the abolition of private wealth. And so you'll see people who seem to be Marxists, but who devote their entire lives to seeing that situationally never happens because I'm a famous Maoist. And all I do is talk about how I hate China. And maybe everything that I've said is true, but that doesn't matter because my job is to take a paycheck from what is essentially the CIA, a CIA cutout, and drive attention to something that serves this fascist end in this crypto-fascist way that I've described. And that's basically everybody on this fucking continent, close to 400 million people, and that's basically everybody who's no better than that. who's at least as bad as that person who's working for a CIA fucking cutout. Okay? So the only thing that you should ever say about the United States is fuck the United States. And if you're not saying that as loud as you can to everyone you can, my friend, you're a part of this a cult that's killing this planet. I was going to even talk about some other things, but I'll go back to Dark Winds. I think I even may have said Dark Sands at one point in the show. But go back to Dark Winds and why it's not a fascist propaganda. There's a lot of propaganda in the United States, and why I make the case that it's not propaganda. And basically, that comes down to a couple of things. One of which is not immediately obvious to a person who doesn't know anything about reservations, as most Americans do not, which is that this light horseman, a policeman who works on a Native American reservation, has effectively a different job description than these bootlicking dogs who are policemen in other jurisdictions. It's generally held that police do not protect and serve anyone. This is something that even many Americans are becoming willing to acknowledge to some degree, that they serve private wealth and the ruling elites almost exclusively. That's why anti-police sentiment is kind of at a high in the United States. Unfortunately, almost all of these people who recognize this ACAB, that all cops are bastards, are people who have been influenced by things like what I just alluded to, this kind of trick of Maoists tricking. Maoists should be, in a perfect world, Maoists should be kind of the best of Marxists. Right, but that's a world where the United States doesn't exist anymore. That's a world where there's not mass manipulation on an unprecedented scale to preserve this fascist monster and to preserve private wealth. Because in practice, there's very little that you would say about Maoists that's not good, but that level of manipulation is real. As I mentioned, all cops are bastards is basically true. It's true enough that it could be said at the top of your lungs across the Western world. But you should be willing to acknowledge these caveats, like the one I mentioned, along the lines of Gorky Park and socialist police officers. And the same is true, perhaps, this might be minorly controversial, no one gives a shit, perhaps to a lesser degree of Native Americans, cops, because they're still cops in the U.S., as opposed to maybe, say, an indigenous police force, which there were in the USSR, would be a better example than U.S. Reservation cops. But they're still a damn sight better than the pigs of other jurisdictions. So that's why I would say that Dark Winds is arguably not propaganda, and why I would even go so far as to kind of talk about it on this program, as opposed to pretending it doesn't exist, as I do with almost every other cultural property, except when I'm just criticizing them, saying their shit. So Dark Winds has that kind of going for it. It has some other things going for it. The leads are Native Americans who are humanized. They are people who are, say, not raging alcoholics. They're people who are living their lives and trying to take care of their families. And similarly, the European American characters in the story are depicted as all European American characters in every story should be depicted, as devils in human skin, with no conscience or moral compass at all, upholding fascism in every way, because that's actually true. You have a duty, if you fit that description, a European American person, you have a duty far beyond that, in a certain sense, far beyond that of Native Americans and African Americans, because you know that you're the beneficiary and to a high degree the person upholding that fascism. So you've perhaps had a certain privilege as a result of that, which includes things like having access to the kinds of resources that will allow you to even understand this perhaps more than the rightful owners of this nation, indigenous people and descendants of enslaved people, who have been subject to more propaganda than you have and more abuses than you have because of that position and that set of dynamics. So you have a duty to fight even more so than they do if you want to have any revolutionary potential, if you want to be a human being at all. You have a duty, and you have a duty to be more patient with those people. And I hope that you have the opportunity to meet many Native Americans and many more African Americans in your life. And you have a duty to not concern control, as Maoists, unfortunately, in the Imperial Core do. That was just one example. It's not fair to single out malice above all others, because almost every facet of U.S. Culture serves this crypto-fascistic set of mechanisms that I just described before this, turning back to the dark winds. So you have a duty to be patient with Native people and African American people who have not come to understand this set of exigencies and the reality of this fascist system yet. You have a duty to raise consciousness and to share this knowledge as well with everyone that you meet, including trying to work with these groups specifically. And the reason that I said that Dark Sands is not so bad is because it does portray about as much as you could expect American television show. An example of something doing a better job of that would be I'm a Virgo, Boots Riley's show, which I give 2 thumbs up on this show. I'm not going to give 2 thumbs up to Black Sands, but I will say that because of these anti-fascist narratives, and because it's a more popular show than I'm a Virgo, right? As a result, I'm a Virgo is a better show. I'm a Virgo is ostensibly anti-fascist. Black Sands is only anti-fascist in certain light, but it is more popular because of taking this softer approach. I don't recommend then the thing being that you think, oh, the thing is more popular for taking a softer approach. Let's take the softer approach. That is the essence of liberalism, the essence of the ECOCIDAL project, and all of our failings is doing precisely that. Well, I'll just the problem is big. The problem of the planet being killed is big. So I'll just do nothing. It's effectively what you're doing when you say, I'll make a show like Black Sands instead of making a show like I'm Virgo, which is itself, Bruce Riley is not what I would say that is the perfect example of African-American Marxist revolutionary. But he is but the best example of a person who's made a television show or film along those lines. But no light-skinned person really has a right to say what I've just said. You have to try to fight for a better world, and that includes considering all of these things. So I'm not going to endorse Black Sands, but unlike almost every other cultural property in existence, I did not ignore its existence. So that means that it's, in my estimation at least, anti-fascist enough to be born.